This is Carrie Cassidy from Project Camelot, and I am here with Dolores Cannon. I'm very pleased to introduce our audience to Dolores Cannon and her work.
Okay.
I have been studying your work for quite some time, read several of your books, and I'm very impressed with your diligence, with the care you take with each and every person that you regress. And I just really want to welcome you here, and thank you very much for taking the time.
Thanks for asking me to do this.
Sure. So what I'd like you to do is maybe talk a little bit about how you got started doing what you're doing, and then I'd like to launch into, as we mentioned, what you call the three waves who have come here at this time to help the planet.
Okay. Well, I am a hypnotherapist. And as that, I'm a counselor, and I do a lot of therapy with people. But I began in hypnosis over 40 years ago. And I was doing it when there was no New Age, nobody knew about reincarnation. There were no such things as past lives. Nobody knew anything about it. So I guess I was setting the stage way back then. And I got into it totally by accident. I was doing hypnosis just for habits, stop smoking, lose weight. Nobody else knew of any other way to do it. When we got into reincarnation by accident. And of course there were no books out to tell you what to do or what to expect. So from the beginning, my curiosity has just said, I want to know more. I could have stopped because it was kind of very unexpected. But instead I kept exploring and exploring. And my first book that was written back then was about my beginnings. And I couldn't get it published because nobody knew anything about it. It was way ahead of its time. So now it's come out.
So what was that book? What was the title?
It's 5 Lives Remembered.
Okay.
And it was the story of how we began. And in the beginning, I tried to get it published, but there were no New Age publishers. There were no New Age bookstores. And the publishers said, we don't understand it. We don't know anything about it. So I had to put it to the side. But then as I continued my work, and I began doing past life regressions and past life therapy intensely 30 years ago. So that's what I've been doing ever since. And during that time, I began to get more information. And that's when my books began to be published then. But it took many, many years for the rest of the world, I guess, to catch up with what I had already found 40 years ago.
So at some point you started to get remembrant people going not just back to past lives, but also talking about coming into the planet from other solar systems,
Yes.
other experiences as ETs.
As I said, 30 years I've been doing the past life regressions. Then 25 years ago, they asked me to become a UFO investigator. Because in Arkansas, where I live, there was nobody who could explore this. There again, it was all new.
When you say
The
they,
investigators. MUFON in those days, where they were saying they needed somebody because they were getting people who thought they had had abductions, but they didn't know who to work with. And they brought in psychologists, and they would put the person into trance, get them on board a craft, and then they would say, I don't know what to do, and they would wake the person up and jerk them out of the scene. That's not therapy. Because they're getting into something, but they say, I don't know what to do with this. It's not in the book, so I don't know what questions to ask. So they called me and said, would I be willing to work with it? Because they said, you've been in the bazaar for so long, it shouldn't frighten you. Because I was into the past life regressions, and I was used to the strange and the unusual. But they said it shouldn't frighten you, and I said, no, because I'm just too curious. So they wanted me to come to a meeting of 25 different investigators. It was a state meeting. And they were going to bring a woman from Oklahoma who thought she had had an experience. And they wanted me to put her under in front of all of them and ask questions. Not the best atmosphere. It's a goldfish bowl atmosphere. We didn't know her. She didn't know us. And so they wanted me to see if we could find out anything about it. And I had never done this kind of work before. But all along, I've had to write my own rules and regulations in all of hypnosis without anybody telling me what to do. In my technique, you go back to a past life. So here I had to adapt it to stay in this lifetime. But it worked. And they didn't know I hadn't done it before. And we took her on board the craft, and we got a great deal of information. After that, they just kept sending me cases. And then, well, I didn't like the way the MUFON was doing it. Is it okay to say this? Or?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay. What I didn't like, they are so much into the nuts and bolts, the scientific.
Right.
They want to have something they can touch, feel, dissect, tear apart, or it doesn't exist. When
Right.
it comes to hypnosis, they don't understand it. And so when I was having sessions, and some of these investigators were present, they began making fun of a client while they're in trance
Oh, wow.
and making snide remarks and things. And I said, I can't have that. I will not subject anyone I work with to that. And I just thought they were not serious about what I was doing. So I decided then I'm not going to work with them anymore. Now there's a new director. I think they are more open now, but this was 25 years ago.
Sure, and I think that there was a resistance within the UFO sort of movement for many, many years that's only started to sort of defrost, I would say, even in the last 5 years, to where they're more interested in hearing about the occupants of the craft rather than the craft and how it flies.
Yeah, because
right?
they wanted to know, for instance, we were having the session, they wanted to know what kind of fuel to get the craft from here to there, how many miles an hour, what makes the engines move, and it's not done that way.
Right.
They're propelled by thought. There are crystal powers on board the craft, but it is mostly done by thought.
Sure.
And by the group thought of everyone on the craft can do this. And they don't go from this planet to the next planet out there, they go through dimensions. Well, they couldn't understand this, and they just thought, oh, this is a bunch of, crap, and so they were making fun of what I was doing. And so I wasn't going to do that. But I had one man, Louis Farish, if you know him. Lou Farish is the one who puts on the UFO conference in Eureka Springs.
I see.
It's been going on for 22 years. And he was like my confidant all the way through. You have to have someone you can talk to and bounce ideas off of. And he was always open. So I shared everything I found with him. I didn't share with MUFON anymore. And I began to go way beyond what they had found and what they were interested in.
So let's fast forward a bit, because you're now writing these books called The Convoluted Universe.
Yes.
And what you began to find with your clients was that things didn't follow a linear sort of pattern. Isn't that right?
Take a printer. Because in the beginning, it was just taking them on board the craft. Now, my book that I've written about this, my 25 years, is called The Custodians. Because all through my work, I've not seen any negativity. It's always been positive. This is the way I see them, as the custodians of our planets. The first book I wrote on it was The Keepers of the Garden. We are the garden, and they are the gardeners. And I've never found negativity, because I could see why they were doing what they were doing and the reasons for the whole thing.
Okay, and when you say they, who are you talking
The
about?
ETs.
Okay. And but different descriptions of different groups, because you're
There are
coming
many,
across.
many, many. But this is what people find strange. I guess your audience will accept it. As I began doing the normal, UFO abduction scenes where they're on board the craft and everything, and they're always full of all this fear and all of that. See, I work in the deepest possible level of trance, which is called the somnambulistic level. Most of the other investigators and the hypnotists work at the light levels. At the light levels, you still have the fear and emotion involved with the experience. But in my method, we take the conscious mind out of the picture altogether. We get into the deep level, and you can find the real answers. And when we're at that level, they don't experience emotion and pain or anything. And this is when things began to get strange. Because, well, I'm talking to the person, and I get them into the deep level. They might be crying, they don't know what's going on. Then all of a sudden they calm down and we're able to talk. Then the other voices began to come through. And the first time, the little mechanical voice came in and said, "We are scanning." And it's like, okay, what's going on here? And you could feel a vibration through your body. And then they said, all right, she's the one we're supposed to tell. And they said, why give the information to just anyone? Give it to somebody who will use it. Mm-hmm. And then they said, what do you want to know? You don't ask me, what do you want to know? Because I want to know everything.
Sure.
And so I began asking the questions, and it was ETs on board the craft. While they were working on the person, would be answering my questions. I wanted to know what they were doing, why were they doing it. Then I wanted to know about them. I wanted to know about their life. Did they live on the craft, what it was like on the planets they lived on. I wanted to find out about how the ship was powered. I wanted to know everything. How do they eat? How do they procreate?
So you were talking to which groups now?
They don't have names.
Okay, they wouldn't tell you. I mean,
they don't have names.
But as far as we know, in other words, we know about, for example, Nordics as a general category, and we know about Greys and so on and so forth, even reptilians. Have you gotten?
I've been contacted with all of them. I've come through at various times. But when I would ask them, where are you from? They said, we don't have a name from where we come from. You humans have to put labels on things. Mm-hmm. So if you need it, we will give you a label. But they said, if we told you we were from the planet out there to the north of the North Star, you wouldn't know which one it was because it's not even in your constellation books.
That's right.
But they don't come from planets anyway. They come from other dimensions and galaxies far, far away because they travel through dimensions.
Yes.
And so they said it wouldn't do any good to tell you where we are from. And on board the crafts are many, many different kinds, just like Star Trek.
Okay.
And I've had the little Greys, when they come through, that was one of the first ones, and they are robotic. They are manufactured beings to do the work.
Okay, and do you feel that they're building a hybrid race, let's say?
Building one or
creating one?
Well, all along, that's part of the program. Mm-hmm. That program is over now. It's been done.
Okay.
They have accumulated everything they need. But the little Greys had a different way of speaking, and you knew you were not talking to anybody you could really converse with because they were robotic sounding. But they told me later we had to show you this first so you would know what it sounded like and you would recognize the other ones. One was a very beautiful woman that came through, and she gave us a great deal of information. And she responded a lot to me during this one the book there. So I don't know if you would call her a Nordic or not. She had auburn-colored hair. Mm-hmm. They look human, but of course they aren't human because the organs have been changed. They can, they don't consume food, but they said the breathing mechanism, for instance, can handle any kind of gas in any atmosphere they find themselves in, except for a sulfuric acid. So they are developed their body can take anything, mm-hmm. and they don't have to eat because they travel.
Well, when you're actually regressing individuals, so you have various ET races coming through these individuals.
They are the ones
right?
that are working on the person, and while they're doing it, they say, all right, I'll talk to you for a little bit, and they'll start telling me things. The one who was the female with the auburn hair was a doctor mm-hmm. on board the craft. And she said, it's not a doctor as you think of a doctor. It's a doctor, they work on energies. Mm-hmm. And this is why they would explain what they were doing.
Okay, but you're also doing therapy on the person themselves, right?
Yes.
And so you're talking to the ETs and you're dealing with the person. So your subject matter has to also relate to that human being that the ET's coming through, isn't that right?
Yes, because they will explain what they have done to the person, why they have done it, and then by the time the person wakes up, they'll say, well, if that's what happened, I can live with it. Most of the other therapists work in the emotional level just only frightening because they don't understand what's really happening. They told me the ideal situation should be that the person never remember anything about the experience because they have been coming since the beginning of the earth, taking care of humans since the beginning of the earth. And they don't want to interfere with the individual's life. We should, because of free will, we should be allowed to just live and experience life as we know it. Not supposed to interfere with it. But they said because the chemistry of the brain has changed, the pollutants in the air, the additives to the food, if the person is on drugs of any kind, recreational or medical drugs, if they are drinking on alcohol, it changes the chemistry of the brain. Mm-hmm. Thus, when the person remembers an experience, they don't remember it all. Usually it's parts of an experience or a dream. They are remembering the experience in a distorted fashion. So it's not correct. And that's why they're scared. They think they've been raped. They think all kinds of horrible things have happened to them. And this is what the ET community, the UFO community, they exploit that. They have speakers come and talk about all the horrible things that were done to them. Well, I can have the same person that somebody else has got this horrible story from. I do them, we get a totally different story because we find out what really happened. And it's not at all what they thought it was. Because of the chemistry of the brain filters the experience. That makes a difference.
Okay. And perhaps you are also, because you're the receiver, right, on a certain level, so you have a certain openness to accept whatever might come, rather than to preconceive or have a...
But see the therapy for the person. Some of them are afraid to go out of their house after they work with other therapists. They're afraid to go anywhere because they're afraid to go to sleep. And when you find out what really happened, that's therapy. And that's what I work with.
Okay, but you're working with MyLab individuals that have been military abductions. You're familiar with that?
I've never done the military abduction.
You've never
I've
had
never
any
had in
exposure with that?
25 years, I've never had anyone that had anything to do with the military. Other people say they have, but it's interesting that mine have never been that way.
Okay.
It's always been, they don't like the word abductions. They prefer to call it visitations. It's always been people that had problems, and they had partial memories, and they knew something had happened. They had missing time, and condensed time is much more exciting than missing time.
Okay, so let's talk about the future of the Earth and what kind of waves have been coming, because there have been, there are people on the planet, as you mentioned in your lecture, and I think a lot of people can go online and get other lectures that you've done and so on and so forth. But why don't we talk about the waves and then what's coming in the future?
Because I have found everything from how the Earth was created to how they began life, and they did begin life and start us. And they've watched over us all the time, all the way through. But it's interesting that I've never found the military abductions.
Yes.
The military might be involved, but I haven't worked with those kind of people. But let's go back a minute. You were talking about the different races. I've had many different ones come through. Some of them you wouldn't even recognize. They're not any pictures you've ever seen. But they're able to communicate because it's mind to mind, but they speak through the person I'm working with.
Sure.
And I have information that I can tell you that you wouldn't believe, but you want to focus on this other.
Well, okay, we'll be happy to hear some of the information I wouldn't believe, if that's what you think.
Well, whatever. I don't know where you want to go.
Yeah. Well, I'd like you to talk about, because you started off, you kind of ended your lecture yesterday, basically with the 3 waves and then the future of the planet, and then we can kind of go back to some other things after that.
There's one part, can I say it before I forget it?
Sure.
Because I had one that was on a craft that happened off the California coast, and she was taken out, the car and all was taken up into the craft. And she had no memory of any of this. But when the person, the ET, came through, was explaining what was happening while they were working on her, he was saying that with their minds, the big eyes they have, and I was wondering how they see. He said, from where I am now, they were in the craft over the highway. He said, we can see all the way out to the ocean. We can see all the way back into the mountains. We can see all the way down either side of the highway. And we can see all the people in the little boats and all the people in the cars on the highway and all the people in the houses all at the same time. That's how they perceive.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful.
It's not at all the way we would think it.
That's right.
And they see what they're thinking. And when they were with the person, the little grays were all crowded around her giggling, and they said, you know what they're looking at? I said, no. They said, they're watching all of the veins, how the blood is flowing through the veins. They could see inside of her, and how all the little things were working with the brain, and the fluids were operating in the body. They could see all of that by looking inside the person's body. It's not at all what you think it is.
I understand.
That's the kind of thing I find fascinating anyway.
Uh-huh.
Okay. But with the three waves, you've got to understand that they created life on Earth.
I understand
They
that.
have been taking care of us since the beginning of time. Therefore, they monitor everything that we do. They watch us constantly because we are part of the records that go into the history book. In the council, they have histories of every planet. Everything that happens is in the history book. So they have been monitoring everything that happens on Earth all that time. And whenever something is needed for Earth, some kind of a new invention or a new energy, a new power, it is given to us.
Mm-hmm.
But yet we have free will, and they do have the directive of non-interference. You cannot interfere with a developing civilization. I know that's Star Trek, but it's not fiction, it's real.
I think that most people will actually know that because they know that we're on the brink of a complete change on the planet.
They would always give us the next thing that we needed in the growth of a civilization. And I asked them, isn't that interference? They said, no, because we give it to you as a gift when you need it in that time. What you do with it is your own free will. And most of the time what they give it to us for, we don't use it. We turn it into a weapon or something negative. So I said, can't you just come back and tell the civilization you're not doing it correctly? They said, no, because that is interference.
Mm-hmm.
So they have to just watch and shake their heads. People, you have free will, you can do what you want with it, but you're not doing what we intended you to do with it. So that's what leads up to the three waves.
Okay.
Because they were monitoring us all this time, shaking their heads, thinking, what in the world are they doing with all of this? And then at the end of the World War II, 1945, when we dropped the atomic bomb, that really got their attention. They said, we better get down there and see what these kids are up to. And when they came in, saw what we were doing, they said, it's not time. We were not supposed to have that energy yet. That was not in the timeline. Whenever we were supposed to receive atomic power, it was supposed to be used for peaceful purposes and not as a weapon. And it was not intended. Mm-hmm. So when they discovered we had done that, they knew they had to do something to help with it, because otherwise, they said we could destroy the Earth. Earth was not developed enough. We're still too cramped into karma, on the wheel of karma. Mm-hmm. And we can't handle anything like that. So they said, the Earth is not ready. So they went back to the councils and were talking about it. What are we going to do? Because these kids can't handle it. They will destroy the Earth. See, the only time they can interfere is if we would get to the point of destroying the Earth. Then they would have to stop us, because if we destroy this one little tiny planet here, it can have reverberations out through the solar system, out through the galaxies, and through other dimensions. And it would cause all kinds of havoc. So they said that could never be allowed. That's the only time they could ever step in and stop us.
Okay.
So they didn't want to do that. So if you remember, at the end of the 1940s is when the UFO flight began. Mm-hmm. That's when we began to see more and more, because they were coming and watching and seeing what we were doing. So there are councils. There are councils over solar systems, councils over galaxies, councils over universes. There's definite rules and regulations about everything that happens with the galactic community. It's not random. So they went back to the council and they were very upset. They said, what are we going to do? We can't just come in and say, stop it, interfere with them.
Mm-hmm.
So they said there was a lot of discussion, and they came up with what I thought was a brilliant idea. They said, we can't interfere from the outside, but what if we could influence from the inside? And that was what they decided to do. Because the people on Earth were caught up in karma. They were not going to be able to make advancements, not going to be able to move forward. So the idea was to bring in pure souls, souls that had never been on Earth, souls that had never accumulated karma. And where are they going to get these souls from? So that's when the call went out. The call for volunteers. Come and help Earth. Earth is in trouble. And now when I'm doing the sessions in the last 2 years, everything has changed. Now these people have been coming since the late 40s, early 1950s. They've been coming into the Earth, but they don't know what their purpose is. And they look like everybody else. They're totally human beings. They have their problems. They're not ETs. They don't have antennas. But they have ET souls. That's the difference. That's what people have a hard time understanding. Because your soul, you know, is not just in a human body. It can travel. We evolved in ETs. We evolved in other dimensions.
Mm-hmm.
And we just continue going from body to body.
That's
So that's what people don't understand. It's not just life on Earth. So the call went out for volunteers to come and help the Earth. Earth is in trouble. So now when I'm doing the sessions, it used to be they would always go into a past life, and we would find the answers to their problems in the past life. Mm-hmm. Now the only time they go into a past life is if they have karma to be repaid and problems to work out with their families. But instead, I'm getting people who go back to the source, which is God, and have never been on Earth before. They never left God. Or they're going back to where they lived on other planets, or spaceships, other dimensions. And so they don't go into past lives. The session I just completed today was another one.
uh-huh.
I just came from Hawaii. The demonstration I did for the class in Hawaii was the same thing. So it's happening more and more with the people I work with. And for instance, well, I talk about the ones that come from God.
Uh-huh.
Because it's not all ETs. When they go back to God, it is always such a wonderful, beautiful experience. They can't even find words for it. They are there. That's where we all began. We all started with God when we started on this journey. We were all together. And the togetherness was wonderful. It was full of love. And when they describe it, it's beautiful. Sometimes they begin to vibrate and shake because of the feeling that goes through them. And they don't want to leave because they're all together. When they do leave, then it's a feeling of separateness to where they're away from where they came from. And they don't like that. So that's where we eventually will all go back to, is where we began, with God. But these are beings that had never been in a body anywhere. They were pure souls that had never left God. And the other ones were just had other bodies, but they were on spacecraft and planets and dimensions. So when we were doing this, I thought, well, if you enjoyed it so much, they're in this feeling with God. They call it the source. I said, well, if you enjoyed it so much there, and it was so beautiful, why did you leave? Because you know they're in a human body if they're laying there on the bed. They said, they all say the same thing. We heard the call, and we answered the call. And sometimes they go back to where they're having meetings on the spirit side, and they're talking to them and saying, who will volunteer to go? Earth is in trouble. They all say we heard the call and decided to go. They thought it was going to be easy. They didn't know how hard it was going to be because they're full of love and they want to help. But then when I take them through the birth experience and they're coming in here, they say, what was I thinking of? This is the densest, most heaviest planet there is. The energy is extremely heavy and dense. Now they're coming from those types of places. They come into a body and it's like pulling them down and dragging them down, and they don't like it.
Okay.
So as soon as they're in the body, they said, what was I thinking of? I want to go back. I don't like this. But then it's too late. They've made the commitment. But what people don't understand is once you enter the body in any life, even the ones from for past lives, as soon as you enter the body, you forget, because that's the way it's supposed to work. It doesn't make sense to me, but they say it does. Because when you come in, the blinders come down. I've taken them through the birth experience, and they're saying, I gotta remember, I gotta remember. And then when they're born, they'll say, I don't remember anymore. It's all gone. And I asked them one time, wouldn't it be easier if we could remember why we came? If we could remember our assignments, if we could remember our association with other people? They said, no, it wouldn't be a test if you knew the answers. So we come in with everything taken away, and we have to fumble through it all to find our way back.
So the three waves are what is the difference between them?
Okay. The first wave would be those first ones that were born. So I like to think they're in their late 50s. Some of them say they're early 60s, which would still fall in with the category. And I found some that are kind of overlapped between the three waves. But the first waves that came in had the hardest time of all. They don't want to be here. And I hear that time and time again when I have clients, that all my life I don't want to be here. I don't like it here. They don't like the violence. They can't take it. Why are people so mean to each other? They always say, I want to go home. And I don't know where home is, but it's not here. I have people tell me that they remember as a child standing in the kitchen talking to their mother saying, I want to go home. And the mother will say, but you are home. They say, no, this is not home. I want to go home. But they all feel like they don't belong here. They don't want to be here. It's nothing about it they like at all. And they have a difficult time, even though they have a good family, they have a good job. You think they'd be happy. They're not. And many of them in the first wave have tried to commit suicide. Even my last client said he didn't follow through, but they would contemplate it and plan it out because they want to get out of here so bad. And you can imagine what that would have been like in their teenage years. That I wonder how many people them did kill themselves for no reason. Nobody could understand it. They just had to get out of here. But they come that far. But of course, suicide's never the answer. But those people have had a very hard time. But when I've worked with them, then they say, all right, I don't want to be here, I don't like it, but I'm going to stay because now they know what their assignment is and they have to do it. Now these people, in all of the first and second waves, are come in with what is called a sheath or a coating over them, their soul, so they will not accumulate karma. Because that's the idea. Come in with no karma, and don't accumulate any, because if you accumulate, you're going to have to come back again. So it's more or less like it bounces off of you. Because they said karma is like sticky flypaper. You get into it, and you're caught in it. That's what it feels like.
So you're saying the second wave also had the same kind of thing about their coming in. In other words, that karma would not stick to them.
Yes.
But what's the difference again then between the second and the
Okay,
first?
the first wave, I say, are in that age group, maybe 50s now.
Right.
And the second one are younger, like late 40s, 30s, but they had an easier time of it. They came in, they don't feel as alienated as the first group did. They are what are called channels, are antennas of energy. They are here just to be. You don't have to do anything. And some of the people, like this last client, said, well, I'm going to know what my assignment is. It must be something big. And they said, no, you're just here to generate energy.
Mm-hmm.
They
to
come,
hold the frequency is and raise the
to
frequency.
help raise the frequency of Earth
Mm-hmm.
and people.
Mm-hmm.
So you can see how they're influencing people, the ones who are caught in karma, by being around these kind of people. But they generate the energy, comes through them. And they say they can walk through a mall of people and affect everyone that they come in contact with. It's the energy just emanates out of them and also goes into the earth. So they are doing a valuable service. But many of these people in the second wave, some don't get married. Even the first wave don't get married. Because they don't feel right. Sometimes they'll try it to fit in, but it's never the way it should be. They don't feel comfortable with it. But
So I believe you also said that, was it the first wave or the second wave that doesn't have kids?
a lot of them
The
don't
second
want
wave, I
children
guess.
because they realize on this other level, none of this is conscious, they realize that on this other level, having children creates karma. And they don't want that. They want to get in here, do their job, and can get out. Go home. Go back to where they belong. They don't want to be stuck here.
Now,
So
what about the
they
third
live a kind
wave?
of a lonely life.
Oh.
Many of them work at home. They don't go out and work. They work out of the home, and if they do get married, it's usually someone who's like them. And I found some that have found each other. But they are very gentle people, but they just don't make waves. So they're a little different than the first wave. I asked them one time, why did the second wave have an easier time of it? Because the first wave was much more difficult on them, where they wanted to commit suicide. They said someone had to be the pioneers, to set the way, to blaze the trail. Then the other ones followed, the second wave followed, and they had it a little easier. So that was the difference.
And what about the third
The
wave?
third wave are the new children that are coming in. Now, all the DNA in our bodies is being changed at this time because we have to be able to adapt to the changing of the frequencies and the vibrations of the earth as it changes. So our DNA is being changed to adapt to it. So this is, the new children are coming in with all the DNA already changed. It's all fixed so they don't have to adapt. They are the hope of the world, the gift of the world. That's why the last thing you should be doing is putting them on drugs.
I agree with that.
I speak at conferences about the new children, and they have panels where the children tell themselves what's going on, to tell what they're experiencing. The reason why they're considered disruptive is because they're bored. They come in, they learn things very fast, they know more than you think they know, and yet they're treated like children, like they don't know. Because they said, in a class, the teacher will ask them the answer to a question, and they'll tell them the answer to the question. And they'll say, how did you find that answer, especially in math? They say, I know it. That's not good enough for the teacher.
Sure.
And so a lot of these people just know the information. And then they say it gets so boring because the teachers have repeating. They said, I got it the first time, but yet they keep going over and over with the class. So that's why they get disruptive. They're bored.
Sure.
So they said, the ones I work with on the other side, they say the best thing you can do with these new children is to give them challenges. Something to do away from the other classroom. Well, even if they're in the room. They said even if you give them something to tear apart and put back together again, it's giving them something to do with their mind They're just sitting there waiting for the rest of the class to catch up with them.
Sure, probably learning by rote is not interesting to them whatsoever.
It's not, because they learn so fast.
Mhm. So you've got
There's
3 waves
More
coming
of
to
those
the
coming
planet.
in all the time.
I understand.
Yeah.
You've got 3 waves coming to the planet to help raise the frequency so that we can go through what, now I don't know how you refer to it. I know that you talked about what is in essence sort of a second Earth that's
The new
being
Earth.
created.
The new Earth.
And this is also something that Laura Knight Jedzik, who I also interviewed, talks about. And she talks about a wave that's coming, or we're entering
It's already
it.
here.
Okay.
We're already in the middle of it. It
Yes.
started about 2003 is when it became more obvious.
Okay.
Does she talk about the 2 Earths separate?
Yes. Well, in essence, going from into 4D, the 4th dimension
It's
and
5th dimension.
5th dimension.
Yeah, we're
Okay, and
skipping
you're-
4th dimension. 4th dimension is time.
Okay. And so you believe that the Earth is going into 5th dimension?
It's already going.
Okay. And that's the information you're getting.
Yes, but it's not the Earth.
Hmm.
It's separating into 2 Earths.
Okay.
That's why I didn't know if she talked about that.
Well, not specifically calling it 2 Earths, but the
The
idea
old
is
Earth
that
and the new
one
Earth.
group of people will stay behind and not, in essence, evolve at this time and move on to the next dimension.
That's what's called the old Earth.
Mhm.
They said they will stay with what they created.
Mhm.
And that's all the turmoil and the violence and the wars and the catastrophes that are going on. That's the old Earth.
Okay. And then the frequency that's being raised, how do they describe the new Earth being created, then the people going to the new Earth?
It's beautiful. It's wonderful.
Mhm.
It's it's like paradise. When we
Okay.
go, they say when you go, step through and don't look back. You don't want to see is what's happening with the rest. But it has to do with raising the vibrations and frequencies. Now the planet, you must remember, is a living being.
Mhm.
It is evolving. It is doing its own thing.
Mhm.
So as it evolves, it is changing its vibration and frequency to move. It doesn't care if the rest of the world goes with it. It doesn't care if the human race goes with it. We're like fleas on a dog anyway. It just as soon get rid of us. So,
But isn't it true there are some people are already going into this other
No.
Earth? No?
no,
This is not what you're hearing?
no.
All right.
Not until your frequency and vibration is correct.
Uh-huh. And are you not hearing that, in other words, that this second Earth has been already prepared?
That's something different, totally. In the custodians, we talk about the ETs have prepared another planet. That's a separate thing.
I see.
The other planet that's being prepared is in case we were stupid enough to destroy the world. The human race must not perish. And they would take some there to keep the human race going. And a lot of these are the cloning that's been going on to keep the race going.
Okay.
That's a different thing.
Hmm.
They said you can call it what you want when you get there. It's like a new Eden. That's another planet that's being prepared. They said it'll be similar to Earth, but not exactly the same.
Okay. And this new Earth that you're talking about is another concept.
This is the vibrations of this Earth
Mhm.
moving into another dimension.
Okay. So
it's
that's
not a totally separate one.
we're talking about, in essence, 2 dimensions, both people residing on one dimension and the other dimension, and that they're actually occupying in perhaps the same space.
You mean the 2 Earths?
Mm-hmm.
No, because once they separate, they can't occupy the same space.
Okay.
Now they are. That's why people can't go yet, because it's not ready. The vibrations haven't completed.
Okay. So you're talking about a group change.
But till the vibration and frequencies match,
Mm-hmm.
it can't happen. That's
Okay.
why it's happening gradually. They said the human body is going to go. Our frequencies and vibrations have to raise to match those of the planet
Mm-hmm.
as you go. To change the vibration of the human body that quickly would destroy the human body. It couldn't handle it. So it's been doing it gradually. This started about 2003 is when it began to be obvious something was going on. A gradual progression, and they will change the vibrations and frequencies up a little notch until you adapt to that. This can take several months, and there will be definite physical symptoms as this occurs. Then it will even out, and then it will go up another notch. So it's a gradual process. But now it seems like it's not affecting the human body as much because we're gradually adapting to it. The older people are having the hardest time adjusting. The young ones are coming in already adjusted. It's the ones in the middle that are having trouble. But those that can't handle the change will just leave the planet.
Okay.
They'll make a transition, they'll die, in other words. But they said that's okay. That's why so many are leaving all at once. It's all right to do that because they are not ready to handle the vibrations and the frequencies. But as the body adapts, as you move through this, then we will all move together. That's when the separation occurs, when it reaches that point.
And have they given you a year or a time for that?
No, one thing I keep asking them questions about it, they say, we can't answer all your questions because we don't know. This is the first time in the history of the universe this has ever happened. So we don't really know what's going to happen. So they said, it's the biggest show on Earth. All the ETs, everyone is watching. They want to see if we can pull it off. But let me give an example that, I don't know if you know Annie Kirkwood. She wrote Mary's Message to the World. And we used to do panels together. She had a vision that I think really describes it the best way. Because it's very hard to understand the concept of things splitting and becoming two. But it's evolution is what it is. She saw the Earth. And then she saw it begin to pull apart like a cell does when it divides. And as it began to pull apart, she saw it break apart into two Earths. One was the new and one was the old. And over here, she heard them saying, we did it, we did it, we did it. And over here, it was like, poor thing, she died believing all that. So, the one will not be aware of the other ones. It's like in the Bible, in the book of Revelations, when they talk about the new heaven and the new earth, one is left and one is taken. It's that like a concept.
I understand. Okay.
So the old earth are the negativity, the ones who are steeped in negativity and karma. Their vibrations cannot change fast enough for them to go. But they said it's okay. They're where they're supposed to be. But as our vibrations move with the earth, when it separates is when it comes apart. But we're coming to that time, but it can't be sudden. Now 2012 is what they're always talking about. They said that date is not definite. That is when it's like a culmination, when the energy reaches a culmination like a plateau. And at that time, if the energy increases, it will force the earth to move into the other one. But it doesn't mean that is the end of it. It's definitely not the end of the earth, it's the end of civilization as we know it. You'll begin to notice some big changes. But they said, it won't happen all of a sudden, it'll be subtle. You begin to say, things look a little different. Things don't feel the same anymore as they did on the other part. But as the two moves apart, but that is what happens between the two. So it's a little hard to understand. There is a definite separation. And when I was telling that in a lecture, this one man came up to me afterwards and he said, now I'm a businessman. I've never had this happen to me before. But I've got to tell you what happened when I listened to you describe this vision. He said, all of a sudden the auditorium disappeared. I was out in space and I saw it just exactly the way you said. So he said, I'm going to go home and make a computer drawing of what you said and I'll send it to you. Just don't tell anyone where you got it. And I put it in my book. We have the color one at home.
Okay.
And the new earth is slightly over the old earth, and it's glowing, where the old earth is different. And it's hard for people to get the concept of the idea. but they're definitely two separate things.
So this information comes to you from a variety of the clients that you deal with, isn't that
I work
right?
with thousands and thousands of people.
And each time they are talking about this process, isn't that right? I mean, you're
When
getting
it comes out
multiple
in the therapy that I
testimony.
work, because I ask so many questions.
Mhm.
And I think it has more validity when I get the same information coming from many people that have no idea what I'm looking for. So I ask a little more questions each time to try to fill in the blanks.
Yes.
But it comes through many, many people. A piece here and a piece there, and then I have to put it all together like a puzzle. But, so I keep wanting to clarify it. I want more information to find out. But they said it's never happened before. We don't know what's going to happen. But you may tell some of the symptoms of the body that the
Sure.
people are experiencing.
Okay.
Because even the client I just had, they were saying, don't worry about these symptoms. They're normal. But you have people go running to the doctors. And when they start, people think they're getting ill. But it only lasts for a few days or so, and then it'll even off. Okay, some of the symptoms they've experienced is high blood pressure, heart palpitations. That's a big one because they think they're having a heart attack. But it's the irregular beating of the heart. Also, depression, dizziness, headaches, body aches and pains. I think those are most of them, but they sometimes go from one to the other. They go to the doctor can't find anything wrong with them.
Well, familiar with the work of Barbara Messiniak?
Yes, I know her very well.
Okay. And she has a book in which she, in essence, was communicated through by the Pleiadians.
Yeah, I knew she had the older books. I didn't know if she made doing
Bringers
anymore.
of the Dawn, I think it is.
Yeah, that was her first book.
One of her
20 years ago.
Yes, quite a long time ago. But nonetheless, they were talking about this transition time.
Well, whenever, we are in and out of dimensions all the time. We don't realize it, but we do go from one to the other as we shift back and forth. It's natural, but that's not a bleed through.
Okay.
We have to keep the dimensions separate, especially there are civilizations on these other dimensions. There are people living there that we don't realize. There are smaller dimensions, but these are the bigger ones we're talking about. And I don't see how they could bleed through or how they could merge. That wouldn't make sense with what I've been told.
Okay.
But then I don't have all the information. That'd be good questions to ask.
Now, what about your own life? In other words, can you describe what they kind of coin you as having a certain job, a certain mission from their point of view? You want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, when I started with this, they wanted to know if I wanted to do it. This 25 years ago, especially when I got in with the ETs and things. And they wanted to know, they said, do you want protection as you work? And I said, yeah, I can take all the protection I want. So they said, all right, if you're not supposed to go somewhere, you won't be allowed to go out the front door. We'll take care of you. And then they said, as you volunteer to do this work, we'll keep you healthy. And all along, every time they come through, different individuals, they'll say, we will keep you infused with the life force as long as you want to stay in the body and do the work. Because they said I was very important to get the information out. Because I have such a curiosity, I want to know everything. So they wanted to give me as much information as they could. And they keep giving me more and more as the Convoluted Universe comes along, the series. Because every time I think I've got it all, they give me another concept, another theory that I haven't heard of before. But they say we can't know it all. It's absolutely impossible. It's our human brain. It's the mind, not the brain. They said, because the human mind has no concepts to understand these things. So I always say, well, give me as much as you can. In analogies, examples. So they said, we will try, but it's a poor example. But at least we get a little bit about what's going on.
So can you talk about any concepts that you've heard recently that are maybe the most wild
Oh, they're
things you've
getting
come
wilder
across?
and wilder.
What would
But,
be an example?
Let me tell you a little bit about, you talk about the three waves, and the energy of these pure beings coming in. When they first come into the fetus, they said the energy of the mother has to be adapted to bring the energy in. And so sometimes, because of the difference in the energy of the mother with the incoming energy, that it'll mean the baby will abort or they'll have a miscarriage because the energy doesn't match. So they have to keep trying. So then they will bring in a little more to adapt it. They don't bring in the full energy of that spirit because they found out it will harm it. So as they come in, as they grow, as they become a child and get a little older, a little more of the energy will be brought into the body. And I've talked to people that end up being this kind of a person, and they'll say, yes, my mother had several miscarriages before they were born. They had to adapt the body. So some of the, what we call abductions, are when they take the person on board the craft to put a little more of the energy into the body. It's time to receive more. It's working on the body to adapt it to handle this soul, this energy that's in there. I think that's important for people to know. It does not a negative thing.
Yes. Okay. I understand. So is there anything else that you would like to talk about in terms of the future? So you must have a pretty positive view of the future.
That's what I mean. Don't forget, you create your reality. You create everything in your life. You can't blame anybody else. If you don't like what you have in your life, you can uncreate it.
Yes.
That's the important thing.
And I think that's a very important concept.
So if you want to live in a positive, beautiful world, that is your reality. If you want to live in the world where everything negative is happening, that's your reality. You have a choice.
Okay.
But they did say, in order to go, if you're going to go with the new earth, there's two things you have to do that are very important to help change your vibration. The first thing you're going to have to do is get rid of karma. Karma is what holds you to the old earth. You've got to get rid of the karma out of your life. Well, that means you're going to have to forgive and release it and let it go. It doesn't matter if you came from a bad home where your parents treated you horribly. Let it go. It doesn't matter if you've had a bad husband. Let it go and release it.
Okay, we're off.
This project was very important. They didn't know if it was going to work or not. But now they said with the critical mass, that was the idea, get enough new souls in here to create a critical mass to swing the odds. They think now we've done it. We've got enough people here, the new souls coming in, the new children, that we can do it. We can pull it off and we can save the earth. Okay. And that's why we're going to move on. But now these ones are definitely going to go because this is what they came in to do. The rest of us, if we want to go with them, we have to get rid of the karma. Because the karma is what holds you to the old earth. And we want to get away from the old earth. You don't want to stay with all the negativity and the catastrophes. So you want to move away from that. You have to get rid of the karma. It just holds you. Karma is a law. You have to do it. You have to goes around, comes around. You have to come back again and complete it again if you don't do it now. So in order to get rid of the karma, you've got to forgive. It doesn't matter if you had a bad life. It doesn't matter if you had parents that treated you badly. You learned the lesson. It doesn't matter if you have a horrible husband. You've got to let it go. You've got to release it. The way to do it is release it and forgive them and let it go. And they say, how can I forgive them? You don't know what they did to me. But you have to do it if you want to move into the new earth. So you have to do this, even if they have died. You do it on a mental level. I forgive you, I release you, I let you go. Then you have to forgive yourself, which is also not easy. Those two very important things. You have to get rid of the karma if you're going to go. Then you have to get rid of fear. Fear will hold you back. It will hold you to the new earth, the old earth. That's why they said you have to look at things with a different eye. So you don't buy into the fear. The government, the church, everything is controlled by fear. Think for yourself. Ask lots and lots of questions. Then make up your own mind. Don't give your power away to anyone.
Okay, well, those are wise words, and I
That's what they
appreciate
wanted
that.
us to know. If you're going to go, you have to get rid of those two things to change yourself,
Mhm.
to move.
Well, that makes perfect sense. Is there anything else that perhaps they've told you, or that you think maybe in other interviews that you haven't had a chance to really reveal that you would like to?
They've told me so much, that's the thing.
I understand.
Because that's what it is, it's taking your baby steps to get into this.
Mm-hmm.
Because when they started out with me 30 years ago, they said it was like spoon feeding. They can't give you the whole thing at one time.
Uh-huh.
They said it's just like a baby. You don't give a baby a 3-course meal.
Sure.
You start out giving a baby milk, cereal, crushed vegetables. You don't give a baby a steak. So you can only give it what you can handle at any certain time.
What about the what we call the powers that be? Have they talked to you about the powers that be and how they will make the transition or not make the
You
transition?
mean the government?
Yes, the government, people that have actually done, had an agenda on the planet, imprisoned people, basically
They've
used
created
and
karma.
abused people.
They've
Exactly.
created karma, so what do you think they're going to do?
Okay, well, I just wondered if they had been more specific in regard to some of these people.
They've talked a
Especially-
lot about those because that's what they said, don't buy into it.
Mm-hmm.
Don't listen to what they're saying. They're trying to create fear.
Sure.
They're trying to get rid of the population because they can control you as long as it's a certain number, but it's gotten so big they can't control the people anymore. The idea is to get rid of the population and tone it down. And a lot of that is done with what they're doing now. The wars and the food and definitely this whole crazy swine flu thing.
Mm-hmm.
Even the doctors have told me, do not take those shots under any circumstances because you don't know what's in them. But those people are creating fear. When you create fear, you create a great deal of karma. And they create a great deal of karma with what they're doing, so they are definitely not going to go.
Okay.
So they're not going to be happy about the whole thing. But
Is-
they did say Obama is a late bringer.
Did they? Okay.
He's got a new big job cut out for him.
Uh-huh.
But that he's not one of the others, so that's important.
Sure.
He's here at a very important time.
And do they give you information about what might happen, in other words, steps, events in the future? Certain events.
Well, I've written 3 books on it.
On the planet.
Yes, on the Conversations with Nostradamus, where we interpreted all of the 1,000 quatrains of prophecies.
Oh, okay, and I haven't read that book. So
It's
does that,
three books.
was it accurate? The information
Oh, it's
you got?
extremely accurate.
you
It's the
felt?
most accurate interpretation there's ever been. But the thing is, we are changing the prophecies
Mhm.
because he said, even in the books, if I tell you the most horrible things you can do to each other, will you do something to stop it? Because that's the idea. If you tell someone the future, they can make changes. Because the future is not set in stone. It all depends on the decisions that the people make. In your own life, the decisions you make can make a big influence. Because he said he saw time going out in branches, many different timelines that you could go on.
Okay.
They would come into what he called a nexus point. At the nexus point was an event that had to occur. And from there on, it branched out again. So if you knew which path you were going on, you could change the future. And he said you don't know the power of your own mind. That's why we can control the future. If you can focus on what you want, peace and harmony, you can have that. But if the power of one man's mind is that powerful, imagine the power of group mind. You get groups of people focusing on peace and harmony and what they really want. The power of group mind is not only multiplied, it is squared. So the power is tremendous. And that's what I've been doing for the last 20 years, traveling all over the world, getting people to focus on that, and we can change the future. And that's what we're doing. That's why the prophecies have changed because we are going in a different direction. I see peace and harmony.
Have you talked or heard of stories about the indigenous people and maybe even regressed some of them and saw what they are seeing in their own futures and so on?
I haven't worked with too many of them. I've worked with Indians and I've worked in Australia, but I haven't worked with the indigenous people there. But I know I worked with Thomas Banyakin when he was one of the Topi elders, and he was giving the three prophecies. And I think what they see is very accurate.
Okay.
But we can change the future. But I see a good future ahead of us because that's the way we're headed.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, the Nostradamus prophecies talked about these horrible wars that we should have been in already.
Right.
They should have started about the year 2000.
Mm-hmm.
But we have managed to go into the lesser way. We would go away from those things.
And you've heard information about stargates, I imagine, from the people you've talked to.
Yes, I know about dimensions and time travel and going back and forth between dimensions.
Mm-hmm. And
the portals and the windows.
Right, and you've heard, I imagine, that the secret government. You've heard about the secret government.
I've written about that in the Nostradamus books.
Mm-hmm.
He called it the cabal, the government behind the government.
And that they are doing, that they are using the stargates and going basically out into the solar system.
Yes, and they're also doing time travel. They're doing a lot of that. I don't like to be involved with that because I've had some problems with that.
Oh, really?
With the government, and I'd rather not get over into that. But yes, it is very real.
Okay.
I've been told if I stay away from that, I'm better off to go into that part.
No problem. Well, we
because
can stay away from that.
But they tell me to do, I do. But there is a great deal the government is doing. Bob Dean was right on. He's correct.
Mm-hmm.
The cloning it's been. They say my Nostradamus books. We just talked about all of that, about the cloning, about everything that happened. So I know it's real. And the government behind the government. But I just don't want to focus on that.
I understand. So as far as the people that you're talking to now, do you feel that there's a new bit, there's sort of a new wave of information coming at you at this time from the people that you are interviewing? Or do you feel that it's building? Well, I guess what I'm asking is it, in other words, because it seems like in your books there's a progression of information, that it becomes perhaps more sophisticated, more intricate.
Yes.
And I was just wondering if you're coming across some new things now that you maybe
definitely.
haven't
A lot of
come
new
across in the
things
past.
in metaphysics.
Okay.
There's so much. But that's why it'd be very difficult for some people to understand. You're talking about dimensions. And
what about simultaneous lives?
yes, I mean, I do a lot of that. That's what I was talking about. See, you don't realize you don't just have one soul that comes into this body. You have a soul. But in order to experience many experiences at one time, you don't just come into one body. They said it's like it splinters. Goes into facets and splinters. And when it does that, it is experiencing many lives at the same time. This means all your past lives, your present lives, and future possibilities. These are simultaneous lives. And so at times, we do tap into some of those when I'm doing the sessions. But you're not to know about those things because it would be too confusing for you. If you knew all the other parts of you, what they were doing and what they were experiencing, you would go crazy. You couldn't handle it. So they said you focus on this life right now, what you're doing right here. That's the most important thing for this facet right now.
Okay, and what about the idea of twin flames or soulmates? Do you get information on that?
If you want to go there, but it's not important. It really isn't. You have people that you've had past lives with, that you will come back with again, that you resonate with, and you make contracts with these people. Let's go back and do it again through many lifetimes. But they say you'd be much better off if you never found your soulmate. Because you'd be so happy and content, you wouldn't do your work you came in to do.
Okay.
But that a soulmate is just someone that you resonate with. But you'd be better off not to. You have a job to do. So, people come to me all the time, I want to meet my soulmate.
Mm-hmm.
And they're told, you're better off, just live your life, do what you're here to do.
Okay.
It's a nice theory.
Okay. Can we talk a little bit about the healing that you're doing right now?
Yes, that is very important.
Okay.
Because when I was doing the past life regressions, we were finding out a lot of information because we found the cause of a lot of their problems went back to past lives.
Mm-hmm.
But then as I was working with it, I came into contact with what I call this great power that I work with. That's the one that gives me all the information that I write about. The ETs came in during that one time, but then this other one is the one I work with now.
I see.
I call it the subconscious, but it's not the subconscious the way it's defined by the psychiatrist. That's a childish part of your mind. Mm-hmm. This, you might say, is the oversoul, the higher self, the higher consciousness. It is so big and so huge, it has the answers to everything. Why not work with something like that? Mm-hmm. And I had to have a name for it, so I called it the subconscious. They say, we don't care what you call us, we'll work with you. And it's a beautiful, wonderful energy. So when I worked with them, I found they could not only answer any question that the client wanted answered, but they could also have instantaneous healing.
Okay.
Now, I'm not doing this. I'm the facilitator. But if I work with thousands of people and I can call it in to work with that person, it comes through that person exactly the same way every time. I found something. But it's miraculous. I have people now coming from all over the world to my little office in Huntsville, especially to have the healings. And we work with every kind of disease there is, every kind of illness. I have people coming who are scheduled for surgery. Mm-hmm. They don't have to have surgery. People are ready for liver transplants, kidney dialysis. They don't need it anymore because you make yourself sick. Mm-hmm. And if your mind is powerful enough to make yourself sick, it's also powerful enough to heal it. And find out, why did you make yourself sick? That's what I do with the therapy and with the sessions. Find out, where does it come from? Then they can come through and heal immediately. And it's miraculous to watch. It's like electricity, electric current, energy flows through that person. They will jerk and convulse as they fix everything. I've had them put backs back together again, bones back together, rebuild cartilage, dissolve and absorb cancer tumors. It's miraculous. That's what I'm working with. To me, that's the most important part. The information is valuable. It comes through too while I'm working. But to me, the healing, they said this is the therapy of the future. So now I'm teaching it all over the world.
Okay. And how are you teaching it? Like, what is it that what would be a sort of an instruction that you would give somebody?
I do step by step through the way I do the sessions and how I contact the subconscious and bring it in. It's a step-by-step process. Mm-hmm. And I teach this in a 3-day class. If they will do exactly the way I teach them, they can do the same thing.
And so do you have people out there doing what
Definitely.
you've taught them to do?
We have people, so we have a website that is a support group. And they will interact and tell us what they are doing. And if they're having problems, we can help them with it. So I have advanced class for those that are having problems and need a bag of tricks that I've got that you can go further with this. But in one class in Australia, in Perth, we had 91 students. Mm-hmm. And then the next year I just went back, we had 52 students. Australia is taking this and running with it. They are seeing miracles happen. To me, that's wonderful. You can see your students doing this. Uh-huh. I'm teaching in Russia. It's done with translation. They are doing it. They're using it. All over the world I'm teaching this, and they are getting it. So to me, that's very important.
Okay, well that's wonderful to hear.
People can go on the website and find out where on my schedule where I'm going to have my classes. That's what I'm supposed to be doing now is spreading this information.
Okay. And do you feel that sort of maybe your mission has changed a bit? So you're going in this more healing direction than you were, say, originally, where you were getting doing the regressions, which are healing in and of themselves.
You see, that's part of it. You do the regression first, and
Uh-huh.
then you get into the healing.
Okay.
It's all part of it together.
And in essence, you have to make sure that the person actually wants to be healed, because isn't it true that some people wish to keep their sicknesses?
I know, I get people like that.
Uh-huh.
That you have some that if you take away their illness, you take away their identity.
Mhm.
Because they like the attention that they get when they're sick. They like to tell everybody about what the next aches and pains they have. So even though they say, I don't want to be sick, I want to be healed, some of them you can't work with. But otherwise, if they really want to be healed, this is a wonderful way to do it.
Okay.
And it's instant. I only see the client one time. That's all it takes. So I'm still getting information.
Sure.
They still want me to continue to write.
Okay.
So I'm doing it all together now.
Okay.
But it's good to be spreading it and having more and more people learn how to do this. The idea is to help people. That's what it's all about.
Absolutely. I agree. Well, thank you, Dolores Cannon, for
Okay.
your service to humanity.
Okay, thank you.